Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. BrightWord is a leading platform for diverse storytelling, where voices from all backgrounds can share their unique narratives and connect with readers from around the world. Follow our regular podcast updates, where we strive to foster a literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Good afternoon, and welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. I'm your host, John Lobb, and today we're thrilled to have a return visit from author Gary Kidney. His novel, The Eagle Scout Picture, a riveting World War II spy novel. Gary, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you back and find out more about the book. And I guess we can dive right in. Since the launch of the book, what kind of reader feedback have you gotten, and has any of it surprised you?
So no surprises. Most of the feedback has been very favorable. I did notice I've got a bad review out there, and that's okay with me. The book does have some sexual material and some bad language, and so that's okay. Some people just are not interested in that kind of thing. But the overall feedback has been great. The thing that has impressed me most about the feedback that I've received so far is that people have said, it's a page turner. I didn't know where to stop in the book. I didn't want to lay it down. And I think for any author, that's about the strongest praise you can get.
Absolutely. I mean, that shows that the reader's engaged in the story. Have you heard from many veterans or any military buffs in particular?
I have. I've heard both from US and German veterans. So when I started the process of doing this book, I actually had two World War II veteran German readers read it and as a beta reader. And they were astounded at how close I nailed the truth of German culture for the time. And since then, lots of feedback from historians and veterans and military personnel who seem to have liked it. World War II holds a kind of a sweet spot in everybody's memory, although it's beginning to fade away these days. After Korea and Vietnam, there's still some kind of longing for the great American hero. And so lots of people have responded to me in that direction, saying that they're glad that some of the untold stories of World War II, of which this is one, are still of interest and relevance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as we're talking, we're just a few days beyond the anniversary of D-Day on June 6th.
Yes. And I just got back from a cruise in Great Britain and Northern Europe, where I was pushing the book and also talking about World War II history.
So really, you're going worldwide with your story. That's terrific.
The story really fits mostly for an American audience, but the Canadians and the people from the UK and some Australians bought the book from me. So I'm glad that they are not turned off from the fact that it's mainly an American style story.
Absolutely. Well, I know the main character, Zelly, is constantly walking a tightrope between surviving and exposure. Looking at that conflict or that tension between surviving and being exposed, did that psychological state affect you as an author? How did Zelly affect you as an author?
It did, and it affected the character as well. So if you follow the book, I don't want to give too much away in terms of spoilers, but Zelly constantly struggles with the morality of wanting to be an American and doing the things that he's been taught in church and within the country, and having to live within what is probably the most difficult time to live, at least in the foreseeable past. So, to a certain extent, the book is a coming of age story. 17-year-old Zelly going off to be a spy and aging year by year through the process of living in the fascist police state that was Nazi Germany. And so his struggle and my struggle kind of paralleled in that process. I found it somewhat hard to write, being a Nazi.
I'll bet. And you mentioned his aging. Do you feel like his sense of identity evolved over the course of the story?
So his sense of identity was really ripped out from under him at the very beginning of the story. And so I think he was adrift for a long time in the story and maybe created a new sense of identity by the time he finished the book.
Interesting.
So in the story, Very quickly after he arrives in Germany, he discovers that his picture, taken for his Eagle Scout banquet, was published in a Nazi Germany magazine 2 years before he was recruited to be a spy. So he discovers that he is part of a conspiracy that's been going on for a very, very long time. He doesn't
Wow.
know how long, maybe as long as he's been alive.
Wow. And he wasn't aware of it till now.
Until he discovered that picture. And I don't even think without the discovery of that picture that any of the people who were handling him on the part of the government or even his parents would have allowed it to happen. It was a serendipitous act.
Were there any parts of Zelly's journey that were inspired, to the best of your knowledge, by real-time wartime operations or
Yes.
personnel?
So this book is an as told to story. I met a man almost 20 years ago now who told me this story as we were sitting on a bench beside Galveston Bay. He was in his 80s then, and I was in my 50s. We were working on a common project for the business that we were working for. We had a celebration day at the beach for completing the project. Everybody else went running off to the water, and there was this silver-haired man sitting at a picnic bench. So I sat down with him and started having a conversation. From his age, I asked one of the questions I always ask. I asked my brothers, both of whom were World War II vets, tell me, what did you do in the war? And he told me, and that story is now the Eagle Scout picture.
Wow. And I'll bet he appreciated someone asking.
He did, and like my brothers, he was not really interested in talking about that story. But I think when he found he had a willing audience who was willing to put up with both the rough and the sweet parts of that story, he would tell it. So to get my brothers to tell their part of the story, I had to nag and nag and nag. I was 12 when this was happening, and they were in their 40s. And so I'm sure they didn't care much about a 12-year-old nag, but they finally gave in and told me their stories. So that has kept me interested in World War II and was really the impetus for writing this book.
Wow, what a tale. That's terrific. So the book hinges on a theme of deception. Zelly has to lie in order to stay alive. How do you balance that tension between lying to stay alive and that moral tension that exists there in that choice?
It's an interesting question because there are multiple tensions that happen in that process. When you're a spy, you're an American, in this case, going off to Nazi Germany, but Nazi Germany has things for you to do. You have to live like any other person your age would in Germany. And so Zelly finds himself not only caught in significant moral dilemmas, but in the dilemma that says, which boss am I going to appease? Do I do what the Americans want me to do? Do I do what the Germans want me to do? And how can I do both at the same time? And so there's lots of dilemmas and lots of deception and lots of struggle with what is the right strategy to do. And Zelly does not always answer that call correctly. Sometimes he makes mistakes, too many of them probably, but he manages to find a way to survive through them. And so another main theory is perseverance, being able to be resilient and overcome difficulties when they happen.
In other words, he's a human being. He's not perfect.
So there's a quote that I like to use from Hoda Kotb, which goes something like, be careful who you pretend you are, because you might lose yourself in the process. And actually, Zelly struggles with that greatly.
Interesting. I like that quote. Loyalty is another recurring theme. Loyalty to country, loyalty to personal ideals. How do you feel Zelly's loyalty evolves through the story?
So I think he came into the story very much loyal, like a Boy Scout would, to duty to God and country. And as he perceives through the time that he's in Germany, he discovers that loyalty may mean more about being loyal to his soul rather than necessarily loyal to a country. So he has to do a bunch of things that he probably would never have thought about doing when he was just a 17-year-old farm boy milking cows and baling hay. And so finding a way to accomplish that is really an interesting strategy and a way of being able to do it. And one of the surprising things was he finds ways in which American history can inform him in what he should do in the strategy that in the solution set that he's looking for.
Interesting. Really an intriguing character, and one that you brought to life. I mean, it's just amazing.
Thank you.
When we think about the scenes that are in the book, and you mentioned it's not all roses and happiness, obviously. Was there any one scene in particular that was the most difficult for you to write, or a passage that was difficult?
The most difficult scene to write was actually the first one that I wrote. And it was just days after he arrives in Germany. And he's in the Tiergarten, which, by the way, is my favorite city park anywhere in the world. And I needed to find a way of getting inspired to write that scene. I couldn't write it sitting at home. I wasn't able to put pen to paper or fingers on the right keys on the keyboard. So I went to Germany and I sat in the Tiergarten and read a book, Lyric Larson's In the Garden of the Beasts. It is a book about the U.S. ambassador's daughter falling in love with a Gestapo senior officer. And because they're coming from such diverse backgrounds, they can't meet publicly. So they steal off into the Tiergarten to have their trysts. And I'm sitting there reading that book in the spot where it happened, which is a powerful thing by itself on the way. I pulled out the laptop and I wrote the scene. That scene is the scene where Zelly is first struggling with the fact that he's been lied to all of his life. And he has to try to decide, is my whole life a lie? Or is there even truth? Is it just a matter of perspective? And that scene occurs on page 26 of the book and was the most difficult, and I also think one of the more powerful scenes in the book.
Interesting. And perhaps no coincidence that being the most difficult and most impactful go together.
Right. It gives him an opportunity to look at the emotions that he's dealing with in this process. Being in a foreign country with no friends and a whole bunch of different people's expectations for what he should do and what he's going to have to do, and realizing there's no lifeline. There is no way that I can call in somebody to come help me. I don't have a 911 that I can call on the telephone. And so having to struggle through that process, I did with him on that bench in the Tiergarten.
Very interesting. What an insight into the writing process from an author. Thank you for sharing that. Were there any characters or subplots that didn't make your final edited version of the book that still bop around in your mind?
The first 120 pages.
Okay.
So I started the book as writing instructors tell me to do. Start with the inciting incident. So I started writing the book with Zelly at age 17 when an Army staff car drives up the rutted driveway to his farmhouse in Fredericksburg, Texas. 3 men pop out and they recruit him to go to Germany as a spy. He's the perfect person because he speaks German at home and learned English at school. His father and mother immigrated just before World War I, and his father served on the U.S. Army in the war. But they have kept German at home, and so he's dual fluent in both languages, and he's been encouraged to take after his interest in electronics. And so those things, one thinks, are why they ended up choosing to recruit him. You also discover in the process of the book that there are many more levels to that, why they recruited him in the process. But I had to leave out the first 120 pages, some of which explain an awful lot. So there's a mystery in the book about how Zelly achieves a scar. And the SS agents that he worked with are very interested in that scar. Well, the character who gave him that scar is a man that he calls Bald Bart, who he met in training in San Antonio with the Army before going overseas. And exactly how Bald Bart gives that scar is one of the mysteries in the book. It wasn't a mystery when it started out, but Bald Bart and several other people became lost to the cutting room floor. And that happened with one of the first dealings that I had with a professional editor. He says, I love the book. I love where it goes. But it would sure be nice if we could start on page 1 with his arrival in Germany, not 120 pages of training him to get there. He thought
Interesting.
about that and said, okay, it's gone.
Interesting. And I suppose that's the value of an editor, right? And a publisher is to know where to start telling a story and perhaps in a sense that material being missing, it makes the overall book a stronger book.
So I think it does. I have no doubt after doing what I did with it through the editing process with a professional editor, the book is a much better book than it was when everything was there and chronologically explained. Benefit of that is a lot of authors are taught write character profiles and then use that character profile to help you guide the process of that character. I didn't have to do that because I had 120 pages of profile.
Absolutely. Good point. So obviously it's a novel. It's came out of your mind, but you obviously took great deal of care to get the details right, to be true to reality. Did you ever find a tension between wanting to be authentic and wanting to make a good thrilling story?
Yes, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be because if you actually think about it, isn't war by nature a thriller?
Good point.
And the issue was, though, that there were times in Zelly's story when it was really quiet. There wasn't much happening like you would expect a thriller to do. And so I turned to what was happening in the war and decided that I would include those pieces in the book. So, about 2/3 of the way through the book, sabotage begins to happen to some of the things that Zelly is working on and is responsible for producing for the Germans. He is not responsible for that sabotage, but he knows who is. And how he deals with that sabotage and the events of that sabotage added a layer of thrillerness through that area of kind of a quiet time in the book, and I exploited that in the process. So I think I was successful in that by having people tell me that it was an unputdownable book, a page turner. So there were many things from the war. And I do want to emphasize every event from the war that's reflected in the book is absolutely accurate to the best of my historical ability.
Absolutely. And I think the care that you put into your research and looking into the realities of what happened on the battlefield and what you constructed in your story, that care comes through. And I think people can sense it and appreciate it.
Thank you.
So readers, I'm sure, are hoping for a sequel. They want to know more about Zelly. Any thoughts on a follow-up story?
Yes. So the book was planned to be the start of a sequel, the start of a trilogy, actually. And I plan on two more books and maybe a fourth one if the circumstances work out to do it. So there will be a sequel, which is probably 80 to 90% finished at this point. And I hope to release it on about February of next year, kind of on the anniversary of releasing this version of the book to build up some anticipation for it. And then probably another that will follow after that by a year. The third book in the series has already been written because I thought I needed to know how this ends before I start writing the middle.
Good
And
point.
I've done that. So the new book starts in 1956. The end of the Eagle Scout picture has Zelly working for the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to the CIA. And on moving on into the future, he comes back to Germany in 1946. The enemy now isn't the Germans. The enemy now is the Soviets. And so he's in the middle of the start of the Cold War. And one of the things I think the book is going to do is explain to people how the Cold War started. I think we've forgotten that. You know, we know what it was, we know how it worked and how it ended, but we don't know what started the Cold War. And I think this book is going to lay that out.
Interesting. Wow. So if the Eagle Scout picture were to be made into a movie, who do you think would play Zelly?
So I think you would have to find a young German actor to do it. That's not hard to do. When they did Film Before the Fall, Max Rehmelt became the star character there, a German actor that they plucked out of soap operas, I think it was. And with The Reader, they've used that same process to pull a young German actor and giving him a start outside his own country. I think that's the way that they would have to do the casting of Zelly. I don't think an American can play him well for two reasons. One is there is German in the book, and so somebody is going to have to know how to speak German in a fashion that isn't just picking up a word or two or a phrase here. And the second aspect of that is the German language is a little bit different than English, and I have written this book on purpose in a fashion that gives you the feeling that some of it has been translated from German, because I want you to understand all the way through, even though I'm writing in English most of the time, that it does come in that fashion. So I hope there's a young German actor who would like to show up in Hollywood that can be found at the time, and I'm hoping even more that somebody from Hollywood or Netflix or Prime or Apple will decide, let's make a miniseries out of this.
Absolutely. And it wouldn't surprise me one bit to have somebody in those creative endeavors become aware of the book and see a movie in their mind. So we'll hope that happens.
I've been told it's very cinematic by many of my readers.
Excellent. So until the movie is made, I assume the book is available on Amazon and other retailers?
Yes, it is. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple for Apple Books. We're just now in the process of trying to do an audio book for it, but it's as an ebook and a print book at the moment. Audiobook is probably still a few weeks away.
Well, I know that our audience will be looking forward to that as well. There are a number of people that like to read by listening, so I'm sure the audiobook will be a welcome addition to the offerings there. Gary, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure chatting and learning more about you and the process of creating this novel. It really sounds like an intriguing story. I think our audience, if you haven't already purchased the book, I encourage everyone to get a copy.
Right now is a perfect time to buy a copy to give for Father's Day. Your father is going to love this story.
Good point. Especially, and even grandfathers who perhaps
Yes.
have history with World War II. I think it'll be particularly intriguing. So thank you so much, Gary. We've been speaking with Gary Kidney, author of the novel The Eagle Scout Picture, a riveting World War II spy novel. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, and goodbye.
You've been listening to the BrightWord Books Podcast, home of the literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.